Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton have been disqualified from the Chinese Grand Prix, and this follows on from an underwhelming start in Australia that was compounded by a very poor strategy call from the team. Ferrari now find themselves 5th in the Constructors' title on the same number of points as Williams, but now they are 61 points behind McLaren, 40 points behind Mercedes, and 19 points behind Red Bull, who basically have only one driver racing for them. Ferrari in China lost 18 points due to the disqualification, and if you look last year, they lost the Constructors' title to McLaren in the very last race of the season by just 14 points. So as easy as it is now to think about how many races we have left and all of the opportunities that are still available, it is going to be even easier to look back at the end of the year and the 18 points that potentially could have made the difference had they not been disqualified. In terms of the disqualification, let's begin with Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton's car was found to have excessive plank wear beyond the legal limit, and in their statement the FIA said, "The plank assembly of car number 44 was measured and found to be 8.6mm on the left-hand side, 8.6mm in the car centerline, and 8.5mm on the right-hand side. This is below the minimum thickness of 9mm specified under Article 3.5.9 of the technical regulations." And now, ironically, both Hamilton and Leclerc were disqualified for this exact same offense at the 2023 US Grand Prix, which also happened to be a sprint weekend. And now, the teams are always going to try to run their cars as low to the ground as possible to get the maximum effect out of the underfloor aero, but they're always going to build in at least a bit of a margin so that their skid block does not go beyond the legal limit. Now, usually they do this on tracks where perhaps it's a little bit bumpy or maybe street tracks or where the surface just causes that bit more bouncing, but the really strange thing about China is that none of the cars seem to be bouncing excessively over the course of the entire weekend, and the Chinese Grand Prix track was resurfaced and was brand new for this year, so it really doesn't make sense in terms of why Ferrari decided to go that close to the limit, and even Ferrari themselves admitted after they got disqualified that they simply just misjudged the consumption by a small margin. When it comes to Leclerc's disqualification, he was found to be 1 kilogram under the 800 kilogram weight limit. This had nothing to do, by the way, with Leclerc's front wing damage on lap 1, as the teams are allowed to repair damage before the car is weighed, and the team even fitted a brand new front wing during scrutineering, which was actually heavier than the one that was used in the race, and the car was still deemed illegal. The steward said after the race in a statement, "Car number 16 was weighed by the FIA technical delegate inside and outside scales, with both scales showing the same result of 799 kilograms after the customary draining of fuel and the replacement of a broken front wing." Ferrari also confirmed in a statement saying that it was just a genuine error. Charles was on a one-stop strategy today, and this meant his tyre wear was very high, causing the car to be underweight. As an aside, this is very similar to what George Russell was disqualified for in Spa last year, in which case he lost the Grand Prix win. This is obviously a massive calamity for Ferrari, but I think what's even more embarrassing and kind of funny is the fact that this is two different fundamental mistakes that they made on both of their cars. Hamilton's plank being set too low and misjudging Leclerc's weight are kind of really amateur mistakes to be making 4 years into this regulation cycle. After the sprint, the cars are out of parc fermé, so you can make whatever changes that you want for the race, and given that they had all of the data that they needed from the sprint in terms of how to set up their cars, making two different mistakes on both of your cars is just inexcusable. Leclerc being underweight was blamed on the one-stop strategy, but even that kind of doesn't make sense because Leclerc stopping on lap 15 wasn't even one of the earliest stops. Ocon stopped on lap 11, Antonelli stopped on lap 12, and then Hamilton and Verstappen stopped on lap 13. This follows on from Australia, where the team made a major strategy error, leaving both of their drivers out on the dry tyre for way too long, even though they had plenty of time looking at the teams ahead to pit on the right lap and should have pitted on the same lap as Verstappen. Looking at how the race played out, they could have potentially finished in 4th and 5th, and so all of these results that they are throwing away, basically down to incompetence, looking back at the end of the season could be very costly. The thing that's really disappointing about all of these mistakes and the way Ferrari have started in 2025 is the fact that this Ferrari is starting to resemble the Ferrari of 2022, the team that was absolutely shambolic under Mattia Binotto. That season, when fighting for the championship kind of at the beginning of the season with Charles Leclerc, they had multiple strategy errors, multiple bad pit stops, a lot of bad decision making, like, for example, not being prepared and not running the hard tyre in Hungary, which they ended up needing for the race. And it's all of these things that just put even more pressure on Charles Leclerc and ultimately basically ended the championship fight before it even started. Since Vasseur joined the team in 2023 as team principal, he has worked really hard to change the perception and repair the reputation of Ferrari. He has improved the team on the operational side, and he has made them more composed and more methodical under pressure. In 2024, Ferrari were the third fastest team on pit stops, only behind Red Bull and McLaren. Over the last couple of years, it's honestly never really felt that Ferrari's strategy has really been that bad, and last year through strategy, they actually managed to steal a few race wins away from McLaren, like with Leclerc in Monza making the one-stop work against Piastri in the McLaren. Given the hype going into this season based off how good they were last year, and of course their driver lineup, which in itself is going to bring with it huge amounts of expectations, this is going to put a lot of pressure on Vasseur. He cannot let the team spiral and for this to become a regular occurrence, and I also think the drivers, even though I don't think any of this is their fault, are also going to be tested. Their leadership, more than anything else, is going to have to be tested, and I think both in and out of the car, they are going to have to take a little bit more initiative, especially on the strategy side. I think the biggest thing that Ferrari are going to have to find out after this race is why did these misjudgments in the tolerances actually happen? Or was it just taking too much risk and pushing the limits just that little bit too much after winning the sprint? Or is there a fundamental knowledge gap or an error in their decision making that led to the wrong decision? For the sake of balance, I think it's also important to talk about the drivers who, to be honest, I don't really think have done anything wrong so far. Going into this season, there was so much focus on not necessarily the Ferrari team, but more so on Lewis relative to Charles. There were so many questions that people had. Will Lewis get dominated by Charles in the races, in qualifying, in the championship? But so far, I think it has been the team that has let them down. And now, that is not to say that either of them have been perfect. Leclerc had a spin in Australia and also had that little bit of unlucky damage on lap 1 when battling with Lewis. However, his pace in China, even with the damage, was unbelievably strong. Albeit we don't know how much the car being underweight actually helped him. I think that Leclerc for the past couple of years has been a championship-worthy driver, and I don't think the start of this season has made me waver from that position. I think it's fair to say that when it comes to Lewis's move to Ferrari, even though there was a huge amount of excitement and optimism about it, there was an equal amount of skepticism as well, in terms of how good is Lewis Hamilton still in Formula 1, especially up against a driver of Leclerc's quality. The sprint pole and then the win this weekend, I think answered a lot of critics. If you look at Lewis's pace compared to Charles over the past couple of races, he was a couple of tenths off in Australia, and then in China, he was actually faster for the majority of the sessions. If you compare him to all of the other drivers who have changed teams in 2025, apart from Esteban Ocon and Nico Hülkenberg, who have rookie teammates which aren't a comparison for Charles, Hamilton up against Leclerc has adapted faster and been closer to his teammate than any of the other drivers so far. Looking at the pole for the sprint and then the win on the Saturday, even though it is not a Grand Prix, it was still special to get that first win for Ferrari, and I think it just showed that Lewis still in 2025, when he is given a comfortable car that can at least challenge for wins, even if it is not the outright fastest, he is still able to switch on that championship mentality. He absolutely nailed the start ahead of Max, his tyre management was absolutely perfect, he survived that pressure from Max as well, and then by the end, he basically checked out to win by 8 seconds. Even though the disqualification is going to grab all of the headlines, the underlying issue for Ferrari is the performance of their car. Behind McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull are unbelievably close. It seems that qualifying is more important than ever before, and everyone is talking about how difficult it is to drive their car at the limit. Hamilton's sprint win almost seems like an outlier, because in Australia and China the race pace got worse as the race progressed, and as we saw in China, there was this crazy switch in the middle of the race when Max, who was struggling massively on the medium and even the hard tyre at the beginning of the race, all of a sudden was massively faster than Leclerc in the Ferrari. After qualifying, Leclerc said, "I think these 3/10ths that we see today are generally where we are. Apart from Lewis did a great job yesterday, but I feel like today I did a good job. I'm sure Lewis did a good job as well, and that's the potential of the car." Going off what the drivers have said so far, it is very obvious that the SF25 just has a very narrow operating window, especially to get the tyres working, and more than anything else, it just simply doesn't have as much downforce as the McLaren. They clearly still don't have an ideal setup to get the most consistent balance out of the car and also the most performance out of the package as well. Leclerc struggled during Friday and Saturday, Hamilton struggled on the Sunday, and that just kind of reinforces the inconsistencies of this car. The team made a lot of setup changes to account for the different conditions, the cooler temperatures, and the more rubbered-in track on the Sunday, and even though they did make the one stop possible with Leclerc, the car just wasn't consistent for both drivers. And now, again, I do not blame the drivers at all for the beginning of this season, but it is clear that the car performance and also the team errors are putting them under pressure and taking attention away from fully focusing on just extracting the most out of their package. And now, to contradict myself a little bit from what I said at the beginning of this video, even though these lost points might be very, very important at the end of the year, there is still 22 Grand Prix left, and so plenty of time for Ferrari to develop, plenty of time for them to improve, and also plenty of races for them to potentially win. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe, that would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.